Plastic evaluation is our core expertise at Gradical. We help medical technology companies choose the right plastic for their application with the technical suitability, regulatory compliance, and improved sustainability. Learn more under www.gradical.ch/plastic-evaluation. Our guest today is Daniel Delfosse. Daniel is an expert for regulations and innovation. He spent his career in R&D positions at Mathys Ltd Bettlach before joining Swiss MedTech 5 years ago. Here he is Vice Director and Head Regulations and Innovation. Here is our discussion. Hi Daniel, and welcome to the podcast. Our topic today is the regulatory development, and certainly an interesting topic in the last few years. What regulatory changes did hit the medtech industry in the last few years?
Well, obviously there was the big one, the MDR, introduction of MDR in 2021, really hitting everyone hard. But for Switzerland, it was even harder because it was coupled with the loss of the direct access to the EU common market. We basically overnight, on that 26th of May 2021, became a third country to the EU because, just incidentally, when the MDR came into force on that day, our Federal Council decided not to continue the negotiations with the EU. And so at 3:30, we had a press conference where it was announced. And at 3:45, I got an email from the EU Commission saying, Switzerland, thank you. You are a third country as of tomorrow morning, basically within 8 hours. So this was pretty hard. But coming back to the MDR, yes, MDR was in fact, of course, for the whole medtech industry worldwide, a very, very big change. Everyone who wants to have a CE mark, meaning selling in Europe and other countries in the world, had to comply to MDR and IVDR.
Okay. And what are the main, let's say, implications of MDR? Because everybody talks about especially the impact on innovation and on effort to get things to market, but why basically? What were the most important changes there?
Well, MDR basically strive to have a higher safety, product safety, which is in a way a good thing to do. So it says we need a much more clinical evidence, pre-market as well as post-market, for every medical device. Now, that is one thing to ask. The second thing is to implement it. And we had a lot of products. I mean, we have 500,000 different products, medical devices that we use in Europe. And you had to transition all those technical files from MDD, which is the former directive, medical device directive, to the MDR, which is the new medical device regulation. Now, that was a lot of work, and in fact, it cost industry roughly 10 billion euros. That's 10,000 million euros. You could have done a lot of other things, but you did. In fact, the whole medtech industry did paperwork, administrative work to document the products better than before. And there's the big question is at the end, will have those medical devices really become safer? Well, let's say, sure, there are a few unsafe products were phased out, but the other products were not safer than before. It's just a better documentation because you were not even allowed to do changes from the transition MDD to MDR. All you have to do is, in fact, rewrite documentation, reapply for a certificate which you got, and only when you have it now, you can start to put in changes. So no, the products are not safer than before. And there is one really a fundamental flaw. Very easy to understand is as a politician, we had this scandal, the breast implant scandal and a few other scandals, the hip implant, the ASR. So we said this cannot happen anymore. So if we increase the product safety, we increase patient safety. That sounds very plausible. Higher product safety is higher patient safety, but it's wrong. That is a fundamental flaw behind the MDR, because patient safety not only depends on product safety. Of course, it's good to have safe products, but you have to have a product availability. If the product's not here anymore, well, then it's not safe. And you need product innovation. If you cannot innovate on a product, you cannot keep up with the state of the art that is developing for the future in medtech. So that's a fundamental flaw. Product safety is not patient safety alone. Patient safety is a function of product safety, product availability, and product innovation. And that's really a big thing that the MDR missed.
Okay. Can you comment on why product availability and product innovation was impacted by MDR?
There is, of course, quite a big cost, as we already said, 10 billion euros at the end. You have to decide as a company which of my products do I keep on under MDR. It's more expensive. Which ones do I transition and which ones do I not? And we know that about 15% of the products were not transitioned, so those were missing. And then there's a secondary effect is under MDR, the engineers were not working on innovation anymore. You needed them to, in fact, do your paperwork for the transition. So the engineers were pulled away from innovation work into administrative regulatory work. Mm-hmm. And so this is why, in fact, MDR has also been a big hindrance to innovation. A, companies had to work on their existing devices. B, the engineers were used for that. And C, the regulatory hurdles under MDR are higher than before. So, for instance, for a 2B implantable or a class 3 risk class 3 device, you need to have a clinical investigation before you even get a CE mark. This was not the case before. Mm. So yes, things have become much more difficult in terms of innovation, and it has definitely hampered innovation in Europe.
Yeah, and there's also another effect that I talked about with Professor Dr. Florian Thieringer. He's a professor and surgeon at the University of Basel, and we talked about this, that you have this effect from reimbursement that also plays a role, which means there is a certain amount of money you can get for a medical device. So your price is basically capped based on what kind of procedure you perform. So if you have a certain patient population, for example, small children, pediatric devices, they usually not get used that often. So you have maybe 1,000 or 100 cases a year, meaning that you have to do all that MDR work, which is just the same as for something that has 10 million cases. And you have to split it across 100 cases. And then there is only this much money you can get, like 5,000 euros or something per case. And then your device can cost a fraction of that. Meaning that there is no possibility of a medtech company to even earn money on this device, even if you because you cannot increase the price to a level which would just break even. So either medtech company does the whole marketing stunt on something and says, yeah, I know that I'm losing money on this, but I'll do it anyways because it's for saving small children, and I just finance it and make a marketing story out of it. See, we're the good guys, we're doing it although we're losing money. Or you just throw it out of your portfolio and say, I'm sorry, I can't make money off of it. Can you just comment on that?
Well, as we call those the orphan devices, like the orphan drugs. It's orphan devices. If you don't have many patients being affected with that disease, or in fact, as you just pointed out, children who are small humans, so then you need smaller devices. And sometimes it did not make sense to transition from MDD to MDR. And we have actually seen quite a few products that under FDA for children are still in use because FDA does not ask for a transition unless you have a problem on the market or you change the product. And under the MDR, well, you have to really do those changes, and that's not done. As you say absolutely correctly, from a economical point of view, when it doesn't make sense, the company has to see, can it cross-finance it, or does it want to cross-finance it, or do you just take it away? And this has happened in a lot of cases for children, that we do not get the smallest devices anymore, because there are, of course, clinical data is missing, because you never did a clinical trial with children, you did them as adults. Again, a difficult thing to do, a clinical trial with children. So yes, evidence is missing, you took it off the market, and this is another aspect of why I do not believe that patient safety has been improved by MDR. In some cases, it has actually been worsened.
Okay, and there's some talk, I did not follow it perfectly, to be honest, but there's some talk that the commission has seen the issues and that it's trying or is willing to correct them. Do you want to say something about that? Do you believe that, or only when you see it?
Well, I believe it when I see it, but there is a big change in the EU Commission, because in November 2024, the EU Parliament for the first time said, hey guys, what you did with the MDR is not as good as you thought it was, and it has hampered competitiveness of the European medical device market. So we have to become more competitive again. So they asked the EU Commission, please change MDR, IVDR accordingly, that we have more competitiveness. So what they did is, in fact, a couple of things. They said, well, we should have eIFUs, electronic IFUs. It's a bit less paperwork and also a bit more sustainable. We should look at WET. WET is well-established technologies where you do not need clinical investigations before you get a CE mark, because other companies have already proven that this is something that works like a hip head in a hip joint. Why would you need your own your own clinical investigation for that if it's been proven millions and millions of times before? So the WET technology, we have just submitted a couple of months ago a big paper on WET as we see it, together with the German association, BVMed, and the Austrian association, Austromed, where we have cited more than 100 examples of well-established technologies that we think should be included in the MDR. And the EU Commission has also basically asked for they call this a targeted evaluation from December to February. They got a lot of responses. They got hundreds of questionnaires filled in, and they got about 600 case stories submitted. And so now they're going to look at it and say, from all out of this new information we got, what can we do to make MDR more livable, and how can we actually create a more competitive environment for our own, European medical device companies?
Okay.
So yes, something will happen this year already, and something big will hopefully happen next year.
Okay. And what would be your wish list for making MDR more livable?
The wish list, of course, has quite a few items, but if I just say one thing, just take the good things from the FDA regulation and adopt them to MDR. That would be, make it more harmonized. Forget about every 5 years you need a new certification. If you have no problems on the market, if your device performs as intended and you don't change it, why would you reapply every 5 years? It's basically a bit of a money-making thing for the notified bodies, but I don't think that's actually a good thing to have. We also need an innovation pathway. There is probably the only regulation in the world that does not foresee an innovation pathway is MDR. So this is something that needs to happen. And then, of course, we also, as we already talked before, we need to look, should the hurdles, the requirements for orphan devices be as high as for devices that are used 1 million times a year? Mm-hmm. And I think no. So those are things that should be changed and will hopefully be changed.
Yeah, risk-based approach. I mean, with the if you look into the chemical regulation, the REACH in Europe, there is like a a mechanism built into it. Is like how much volume you pour into the market with your chemical is directly linked to what risk mitigation measurements you have to take. If you use under a ton, it's just basically you don't have to do anything. I'm not for medical devices not having to prove anything in terms of safety, but it's like a risk-based approach. If you use 1 ton, 100 tons, 1,000 tons, 1,000,000 tons, it gets more and more strict. And I think that's also very feasible. If you do 10 million devices a year, I think it's not unreasonable to ask you to do clinical trials, because that's a lot of patients affected. If you just do 500, it's like the alternative is not having the devices on the market and not helping patients. But let's move on from the MDR. What future regulations and regulatory developments do you see in the medtech industry? And in other words, just what's on the horizon? What's hitting us next? Credical is the plastic expert in medical technology and supports you in the areas of sustainable plastics and material compliance. Our course, Sustainable Plastics and Medical Technology, will bring your development team up to date with the latest developments in sustainable plastics. In addition, we offer the course Regulatory Aspects of Plastic Selection at the CATS and the SCATZ, which provides guidance through the maze of regulations when selecting materials. More under www.credical.ch.
Well, as I already said, the MDR IVDR will have to be changed, will have to be made simpler in certain ways. And I'm not exactly sure when this will come, but it will definitely come, because the EU Commission is under big pressure from the Parliament. They want the EU to become more competitive again. On the bigger horizon is IMDRF, the International Medical Device Regulatory Forum. They are trying to harmonize more and more of the medical device regulation, or the definitions for serious adverse events and so on. That's a very big and important issue, worldwide harmonization of all those medical device regulations that exist. And when you come to the QMS, the Quality Management System, there is also the MD-SAP initiative, Medical Device Single Audit Program initiative. That means if you comply to MD-SAP, you will then have one audit, and FDA accepts it, as well as the notified bodies in Europe, as well as in China and in Japan and in Singapore. That's not yet the case, but this is something that will eventually happen as well. So this would also make it more competitive for the whole world. Yeah, you just need to pass one quality management audit, and it will be recognized worldwide. Then for each product, of course, you need another certificate per product. But again, if you could streamline FDA, CE marking, Anvisa in Brazil, Japan, China, to make it easier for us to prove, us meaning medical device industry, to prove that those devices fulfill their safety and functionality. That, in fact, is what I think and I hope will happen in the future.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a very worthwhile goal to aspire to, not only for medical device, but also for a lot of other regulations in terms of electronic devices or chemical material compliance, because currently there are a variety of regulations that you have to comply to, all based on your market and all based on your device. Speaking of
Maybe
chemical,
can I say one more
sure.
thing? Because I have to contradict myself right away. I say global harmonization. This is the task. It's a very logical thing to do. But at the same time, at the minute, we see regionalization. We see America first, we see China first. We see UK first, and so on. And I fear that maybe not everyone thinks as we do in a global way, but they are also trying to protect their own market. by making something like China is special here. They say you really have to comply to the Chinese regulation, and that is something that makes it very difficult for non-Chinese companies to get enough points that you can actually get a tender. So yes, I'm hopeful when it comes to intellectual thinking that we will have a harmonization, but I'm not so hopeful when I look at the political situation today, where every region says we look after ourselves first.
Yeah, I was polite enough to not contradict you and say, like in the current political climate, how realistically do you think that is? I mean, we will have to see. We will have to see. Trading goods is essential for our economy, and I think certain people will get that at some point. And that's basically the question. If like national interests or like the interests of globalization and a global economy will take over. But let's just leave that at that. I wanted to come to the other topic, basically the chemical regulations, because there's something cooking in the EU, namely ECHA, the potential PFAS ban, and I wanted to talk to you a little about it, because it's probably something that's going to affect the medical device industry very harshly if it goes through like it is. So can you just comment on what is planned to do, and where is basically the issue of the whole thing?
Yeah, well, again, looking from the very top, the issue is Europe has decided to be the first CO2, net zero continent, and also the continent that doesn't pollute the world anymore. So this is very commendable. This is a great thing. The Green Deal, with about 70 regulations coming. One of them, in fact, is affecting the potential PFAS ban. Now, the PFAS ban has created a lot of uncertainty. First of all, does it come? Is it a ban? Is it a reduction pathway? No one knows yet. At the minute, it could be a ban with like 13 and a half years of time for transition, depending on your device. So when does it come? It's not clear. B, where does it come? Is it only affecting Europe, or does it affect the whole world? What if something is made in, let's say, China, Japan, shipped to the EU without PFAS? However, they used PFAS in the manufacturing process, which you cannot do in Europe anymore. Will that be allowed or not? So this will create, an uneven playing field, not a level playing field. And the third thing is uncertainty. We, as medical device manufacturers, we don't even know if our medical devices are affected and how many. We know if they contain PFAS, but we don't know if in the manufacturing processes upstream, PFAS was used in the manufacturing process. So is it PFAS free because it is now, doesn't contain PFAS, but it polluted the world upstream. And the last uncertainty, and I think that's the biggest one, is, well, if there is a potential ban, will the upstream supplier still supply my medical device in the way I'm used to, because they are using PFAS in the manufacturing process? And we know that one of the biggest chemical companies, 3M, has decided to pull away from fluorinated ingredients are the starting products for PFAS. So there are a lot of uncertainties, and it's very, very hard to predict what will happen. Now, what should you do if you are a manufacturer here in Europe or in Switzerland? Basically, first of all, assess all your current portfolio. Don't do anything yet, but just assess it and see where, in fact, are you using PFAS in the medical device or in the manufacturing process as much as you know. B, of course, it's if you have a development pipeline or new developments on the horizon, you have to tell your guys, your engineers, okay, not only PFAS, but the whole eco design, circularity, recycling, include that from now on in every new device you, in fact, develop. If you don't, you'll kick yourself in 5 years' time because you haven't done it. So I think we have to really start rethinking our approach. And they call it the life cycle analysis, CA. They call it now life cycle thinking, LCT. I think that's a really important issue, and not many companies are doing this yet. But this will have to come in the next let's say, in a very few years' time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe some comments on my side to the whole PFAS situation. So, in my opinion, bunching all 15,000 substances into one category with vastly different chemical properties is probably a bad idea. Do you enjoy the podcast? Then subscribe and rate it on your platform. And join the discussion on LinkedIn. Your feedback and comments help us improve the podcast and bring relevant topics to you. Let's form a better world with plastics.
It's against the REACH regulation, because the REACH regulation says clearly, it's a risk-based approach.
Yeah.
So, and it is not risk-based. This is just, let's say, a green wish. We ban it all because it's all bad. And you're right.
Yeah,
it should not be done that way.
There are certain PFAS that act as surface active agents, and that are bioaccumulative, have a very long lifetime in the environment, and they're bioaccumulative and toxic, which is certainly a bad idea and grounds to ban them under REACH. So you could already do it. The problem is
you should do it, with those ones,
Yes, you should do it with those ones. And the problem is the REACH process is very, very long and takes long until you get something restricted. And then if you want to do it for a lot of substances, it takes you a lot of time. So therefore they did it the group approach way. And my biggest issue with it is that they included two things. Number one, fluoropolymers, and number two is substances that are used in your manufacturing process and have no risk of contaminating the environment. So if you leak your monomers, your tensides into the environment around your facility, that's a bad thing, and you shouldn't do that. And that should be restricted. However, if I use something as a lubricant inside my injection molding machine, no chance of getting it into the environment whatsoever, that should be an allowed use. And secondly, fluoropolymers are not water soluble. And the only argument that I've heard from people who want to restrict them is, they're persistent. But persistence and chemical resistance is the same thing. If you have something in your body for 20 plus years as an implant, you want it to be very persistent, because it has to be exactly as you put it in and not degrade inside your body, because the degradation inside your body is probably an issue from a clinical standpoint. So everything that you would use to replace it would be also bannable under the same argument, and that is the issue that I have. So what do you think is the best case scenario that we're getting?
Well, let's put it this way. For a medtech field, I just know we have a couple of things we really need to continue to have, or will hurt patients. That is, of course, let's say anti-stick coatings like Teflon, fluoropolymers, very important. We need also fluorinated O-rings, for instance, in our manufacturing process, and probably some manufacturing aids as well that use fluor. So those are the main things that we want to keep using. And if we have that, that's 90% of our medical device manufacturing process would, in fact, be able to continue as they are now. So I think that would solve a lot of problems. For the other ones, yes, we do have to find replacement, but for those ones, it's very difficult to find replacements. And we have now an IHI call in Europe asking exactly for consortium to be built. What can we do with PFAS? Now, this means there is just a call now. So once they get them together, it takes 5 year, 6 year approach to find some replacement material, and then you're in fact in 2030 or something. And the question is, how long do we actually have until we find replacement materials, or will we ever find replacement materials? I recently asked an audience in a PFAS event, it was at the EMPA in St. Gallen. I got two devices. One is made with PFAS, the other one without. Which one do you want? And then everybody said, I want the one without. I said, okay, now the one without. The mortality rate, instead of being 0.1%, it's 1%. And it's twice as expensive. Who wants the PFAS and who doesn't? And so, of course, then you get your ethical dilemma. You get the conflict. You don't know exactly what to say anymore. And this is, in fact, what we have to do. We have to just show with PFAS, we're saving patients. Without PFAS, you would not be able to save as many patients because you would, in fact, have adverse events in a much higher rate. So where do we draw the line? How much Earth do we want to destroy in order to save patients? And how many patients do we want to lose or not treat accordingly to today's medical device technology to save the Earth? And that's an ethical dilemma. And as you rightly point out, not all of the PFAS substances, in fact, are destroying the Earth. And this is a very big issue here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, you could also have just requirements on not on emissions into the environment, and maybe also cleanup plans where you or your company has contaminated some spaces, and therefore there's different solutions, and just banning materials and banning groups of materials without heavily thinking about what would be the societal implications on that is probably a bad idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we are at the topic of sustainability, environmental protection, what do you know is coming alongside with the PFAS ban in terms of Green Deal regulations that are impacting the medtech industry?
As I said already, over 70 regulations are coming. They're here or they're coming. It's very hard to keep up with all of them, but the battery regulation, the waste management regulation, and so on. And for me, the one that is of biggest interest at the minute is the framework for eco-design. The regulation that came into force in July, I think, last year. Not many people know about it yet. It replaced an old eco-design directive. So this is the way we have to start thinking. When we develop a medical device, looking at medical devices, but probably every product in the world that you develop, how are you sourcing your materials, your minerals? How many human rights problems that you have upstream in your supply chain? How is it used? Do you get, in fact, as we just say, spillovers, whatever that go into the environment? And what do you do at the end of life? How can you recuperate it? Do you burn it? Is it safe to burn? Or do you have to have a recycling scheme in place and so on? The circularity of things has to be taken into account much more than it was or is done today. So for me, this eco-design regulation is something that I'm following closely, and I'm trying to give advice to our members.
So I think the most important point there would probably be how they are impacting single-use devices, because it's a heuristic that single-use devices are bad for the environment. It's like it generates waste and therefore it's bad. That's just the way it is
perceived.
conceived.
Yeah, it's perceived, but it's not true.
It's not always true. There are devices where multi-use is certainly a good idea. Mm-hmm. So, like, you wouldn't use a CT once and then throw it away. It's probably a bad idea. But on the other hand, we have syringes that are very difficult to clean, very cheap to manufacture, and have a very low environmental impact. It's the cheapest and environmentally friendliest way to manufacture a syringe. is with plastic, and to have it single use. You can do the LCA; it will turn out exactly as I told you. If you do a multi-use syringe, you have to clean it with hot steam. You have to make it from more resilient materials, because otherwise the plastic will degrade from the heat and everything. And therefore, the LCA will come out that the single-use device is the best. And what I've seen from the eco design regulation is sometimes they will ban single-use devices. So, for example, with the straws, they just ban single-use plastic straws, which is a bad idea. So the most sustainable straw is no straw. Just have no drinking straw and drink it like an adult. Or you make it the second most sustainable is single-use plastic. And I know this comes to shock to a lot of people, but if you do it from paper, you have to use coated paper. You have to make it twice or three times as thick and use usually an inlay, and that sometimes contains PFAS. So we're back to the PFAS topic again. So that is not a good idea to have goals on means. So the mean that you want to use to make your products more sustainable is to not make them single use. But you have to do the LCA first in order to see if it's really better. And if you have the goal, just don't do single-use devices, or don't use plastic, or don't use PFAS. It's all the same thing. You have to first think your system through and see if it's really better that I do it this way. And then you just decide on the measure afterwards, a while after you have done the analysis. And that is a little problem with the regulations. Sometimes they just tell you what to do and not tell you to think. And yeah, maybe you can comment on that.
Well, regulation is here to comply to. So yes, you have to think how to comply, in fact, and also document it and argument it. So not always easy. But you're very right. Single-use devices are not per se bad. There's a big example that I'm just talking to a Swiss company at the minute about. They make knee joints, knee prostheses. And what they do is, in fact, it's single patient devices. So they give them, at the end of the day, a package that contains all the instruments they need and as well as the implant made for that particular patient. That's a great thing, because at the end, you need much less material. Your operation is about 10 minutes faster as well, because you don't have so many instruments. And at the end of the day, you don't have to sterilize any instruments, because everything is contained in that box. Now, it's not 100% eco design yet, because they throw out the plastic at the end. And the question is, could you use a plastic that you can sort of recycle? Then you, in fact, make that single device much, much more eco-friendly than anything else you could think of. So this is one of the developments I'm quite fascinated about, and I hope this will happen in the next few years as well.
Yeah, I mean, recycling plastic is a topic that, or recycling medical waste plastic is a topic that is dear to my heart, because I am very into that stuff. Not only because it's good for the environment, but also because it's a challenge. Because usually medical waste is burned because of regulatory compliance, because you have to comply to it. Well, the question is would you do that? And just to give you some insights, you need to inactivate it if it's contaminated, and then you get a different waste identification. So if it's contaminated waste, you have to burn it. So you first have to make it not contaminated waste, and not contaminated waste can be achieved by inactivating it, for example, with hot steam. So you treat it with hot steam, which not a lot of plastics survive, and then you can recycle it. So that is the challenge. And then there's the whole logistic stuff attached to it, and the economic stuff, because you would have to transport everything around and get the waste from the hospitals and institutions like that, bunch it together at one plant, and then inactivate and recycle it. So that's I think that's where things are going. But like the point I wanted to make beforehand was like, what if the regulations say they have the goal, but if you read it closely, it gets you to another goal. So for example, like my favorite one is the recycling rate. You just say you have to use at least this much recycling, and then they don't define what recycling really means. And then what you end up with for the very critical devices is chemical recycling, sometimes pyrolysis, and sometimes made with coal energy. So you use coal energy to turn plastic into a oil, then re-synthesize a plastic from it. And if you look at the LCA, it's usually worse. So you have a worse environmental impact, but you have the recycling rate met. And what the whole thing that your requirements did is make it worse for the environment while having the goal of making it better for the environment. So that's having the wrong incentives and the wrong environments can hurt. And I think that's a clear development that I see. It's like you just have the maximization of micromanagement while not really improving the things.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's very, very important to have the right incentive. Just as an example, a real life case I've lived through in former companies. You give your CEO the incentive, you get a bonus if the turnover is as high as possible. What does that CEO do? Yeah, increases the turnover at all costs. Next year, well, you say, I've learned something, I give him a bonus on the EBIT and not on the turnover, because he had a huge turnover, but the EBIT was negative. Now, the EBIT is positive because what happened? He lays off some engineers, he lays off some quality management people, and then he gets the EBIT. So everything you do has an impact. And if we have regulations that say we need to have sustainability for our Earth, but at the same time they prohibit of doing it right because they ask for something else, well, that's in fact a regulation that does not fulfill its promises.
Mm-hmm.
And we have quite a few of those around. Also, regulations like the MDR says, you have to make sure that nothing is contaminated. And the eco design says, well, you should in fact reuse as much as possible, recycle as much as possible. So they're mutually exclusive. And those are the problems that we face at the minute. And then we need intelligent people like you yourself or your father to help us fulfill both in a certain way that makes sense. It's the common sense at the end that has to prevail.
Yeah. So I think that's a good point to give some listeners or our listeners some advice in this direction. What advice would you like to give in terms of regulatory developments?
Now that's a big question. So first of all, if you are in regulatory affairs, well, you need to read all those regulations. I'm sorry, there's thousands of pages you have to read and digest. But then at the end of the day, you have to apply common sense. If some things don't make sense to you as a person, they probably shouldn't be done that way. So yes, apply common sense. If you're not in regulatory affairs, if you're a CEO or a marketing director or development director, listen to your regulatory affairs people. They know more than you will ever know of how to, in fact, do a development in a way that it is approvable in the markets you want to approve them. And very often I see that the regulatory affairs people are undervalued by the executive board. And that is a big mistake because that is very costly.
Okay, thank you very much for your insights. Do you have any last words?
No, those were my last words. We have to all work together, being regulatory affairs, big development, being marketing, in order to get, in fact, a great device on the market. And in Switzerland, and probably everywhere else in the world, it's very important also to listen to external sources such as consulting companies. Especially as an SME, you cannot have all the knowledge in-house. So don't be afraid to ask people like you yourself, Lucas. Ask external help, and they will come and help you.
Okay. So maybe a last point from my side. So you are going to well-deserved retirement in at the end of the year. So I think you're looking for a replacement for yourself. So to the listeners who thought that Daniel was a interesting guy and his line of work seems very interesting, I think his position just opened up. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. And please, if you think that you would like to, replace me, just apply, go on our homepage and see open positions, apply. And I can promise you two things. A, it's never going to be boring. It's not. It's always new challenges. And B, we got a wonderful team working with you here at Swiss MedTech. So yes, and I'm looking forward in a way to getting retired at the end of the year, but I'm not looking forward to stopping completely. So yes, I will of course continue some of my work after my retirement. I think from 100 to 0 is not a good idea. Let's say 100 to 50. Huh?
Yeah. That's very good. Yeah, we need people with common sense and that are fighting for our industry like in a combined and coordinated manner. So this was Daniel Delfosse from Swiss MedTech, and until the next time. Still looking for more in regards to plastics and medical technology? Visit our website www.gradical.ch and inform yourself on the services of Gradical. You can also check out our market report on medical grade plastics on www.medicalgradeplastics.de. Or you attend a training regarding material compliance at CATS or at SKZ. And of course, don't forget to rate and subscribe our podcast wherever you get your podcast. Let's form a better world with plastics.